Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of What a Relief, Islamic Relief's official podcast. My name is Asia Laborno and I will be your host for today. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of What a Relief. Today, we're going to be speaking to Hani Hamwi, who is the Disaster Management Team Manager. And we wanted to learn all about our disaster management. As you know, Islamic Relief is a development, relief, and advocacy agency. So we do all three. And one of the components that we wanted to learn more about is what we do during times of disaster. Assalamu alaikum, Hani.
Alaikum salam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
Alhamdulillah. I am glad I got to catch you because I know you're usually off helping with the disasters. So we have you in town, inshallah, no disasters anytime soon, but when they hit, you are one of the people that responds. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your role at Islamic Relief and how you got to be doing this work.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again. Thanks for having me. And this is actually the second time we rescheduled this, right? Yeah, I think we tried a few months back, but we had an emergency at that point.
Right.
So here at Islamic Relief, I manage our disaster response team, our disaster management team. And what we do essentially is oversee all of preparedness, response, and recovery in the United States. And so anything to do with preparing communities, preparing Islamic Relief USA assets in communities that may be affected by disaster, for example, hurricane season and hurricane-prone areas, or the actual response of deploying our programs into and our assets into disaster affected areas, as well as our long-term recovery projects, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. So we oversee the process in helping communities get back to a new normal after a major disaster hits their area.
That makes sense.
And so that's what I do here at Islamic Relief USA. I've been doing this with Islamic Relief USA since about 2012. I actually started out as a volunteer with Islamic Relief USA, and Islamic Relief USA leadership at one point decided that we needed to have a team that was specialized for disasters in the United States. Being that we have a highly coordinated system and structure that we're gonna, I'm sure be speaking about later, we, decided that there needs to be a team. So part of that initial team that got established began having trainings. And at that point, a young person that wanted to serve my communities, after disaster, I decided to take one of these trainings.
Wow.
And so after taking the training, I took another one, and eventually became certified to deployed with Islamic Relief. And that's when I, shortly after that, became a staff member with the disaster management team.
That's really cool. So for those of us who are listening in and trying to figure out how do we get involved with Islamic Relief, and we tell our audiences all the time, any way that you want to start is through the volunteer management office, right? Become a volunteer, become an advocate, and then you'll find out about all these different opportunities. And then you may discover that you're interested in something that you may not have been aware of that is even possible. So that's really cool. And it's funny because I feel like a lot of the staff, if you talk to them, you ask them how did you start? Including myself, I actually started as a volunteer in the public affairs department. So yeah, that's a perfect way to get into this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you helped us understand a little bit about the management team at a few staff meetings ago, many months ago, and it prickled my interest to say, okay, our audience, our supporters, our donors may also be really interested in how do we respond, Islamic Relief as an organization, to the disasters that are happening in the United States. And so you mentioned something called NIMS. Tell us, how does NIMS work?
So the way that NIMS works is it essentially dictates that disasters start locally. And so you have a disaster that starts at the most local level, at the county, at the city, if that, and then moves up to the state. That's from a governmental side, from the state. And then if needed, this is where we see a presidential declaration being requested from a state that was affected by a disaster. And so throughout this structure of, on the government side, you have, emergency management, that's a part of government. You have first responders that are part of government, fire, EMS, you have search and rescue, and then you have the non-governmental agencies. So when a disaster does strike, the first responders, we can say, are the search and rescue, police, fire, and EMS. They are conducting the search and rescue. They are ensuring safety and security, and their primary objective is to save life and secure an area, whether it's from a flood or from an active shooter or from a hurricane. Their job is evacuating people out of the area. So during that time, non-governmental organizations like Islamic Relief may have a role within this process. For example, the evacuation process. Many times as Islamic Relief USA, we have set up evacuation shelters, whether that was with a partner like the American Red Cross, or we've actually set up evacuation shelters in mosques throughout the country.
Okay.
The most prominent example probably being in Tampa, Florida, where we set up an evacuation shelter for a hurricane that housed approximately 600 people.
Wow.
And so during the initial phase, the non-government organizations play a role. We don't play a role for search and rescue or securing an environment, but we do have mostly on the mass care side, what we call mass care. So feeding, sheltering, emotional, spiritual care are all a part of mass care, which are things that Islamic Relief is involved in.
So your team does all of this themselves?
We do. So one of the first things that we did as Islamic Relief USA is we began working in the area of mass care. So we signed an MOU. We were the first Muslim organization to sign a memorandum of understanding with the American Red Cross. And through that memorandum of understanding, we train volunteers all throughout the country in shelter fundamentals, shelter management, CPR and first aid, emotional, spiritual care, and casework. Essentially all of the skills needed for a volunteer or a volunteer organization to operate a shelter. So from opening the shelter, proper type of registration to ensure the safety and security of all of the occupants in the shelter, as well as feeding and other types of mass care. So we are active in the mass care space, and we are trained and qualified to do that work.
So you said we're the first Muslim organization to do this. Why is it important that Muslims are in these spaces?
Well, there's a question that I answer a lot, and I'll start with this, and then it's like a multifaceted answer. But we get asked the question of how does our faith connect to our mission statement, which is to provide relief and development in a dignified manner. And for us, we have teachings from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who told us that we first take care of our family and then we take care of our neighbor, regardless of who our neighbor is and regardless of what gender, race, or religion they are. And so for us, that type of care for our community is at the core of what we do. When we respond to a disaster, we're responding to help whoever it was that was affected by a disaster.
Do you feel like it's important for those who are affected by disasters to find people who represent them or who are like them?
Yeah. So the second part of that is, yeah, exactly. And so that, having proper representation within the Muslim community. Another question that we answer a lot is, when we do have Muslim families in a shelter, what is the most appropriate thing to do for them? How can we care for them? Should we separate the men and the women? Should they stay together? What can they eat? We know Muslims need to pray. how do we ensure that they have space to make wudu?
Right.
How do we ensure that we have a clean space to, pray inside of a shelter? And so we've definitely, throughout our time as a specialized team, we have served that role, whether it was serving migrant communities, or it was serving Muslims who were evacuated, who chose to go to, a masjid instead of, a shelter. For many families, they may not be able to afford a hotel to evacuate to. They may not have family. And so a shelter is a critical component of, staying safe and recovering quickly. And so offering that space, for diverse communities is absolutely essential.
Yeah, we always talk about culturally appropriate and dignified in whatever that we do, whether it's relief or development or advocacy. So that's why I feel like that what you guys are doing is so important, because for us to be in these spaces, if we're not there, we're not there, right?
Yep.
If we're not there. So another component that you mentioned is the ICS. Can you explain what that is?
Incident command system. Yeah, so an incident command system, if you think about it, if you have 6 people or 5 people or 3 people who have a really good heart and they're like, we want to do something and we have, X, Y, and Z available and we want to ensure that we do it. So an incident command system is essentially just like its name, a command system that will essentially organize the way that this team works together. So one of the critical components of an incident command system is that we need to choose an incident commander.
Okay.
I always find a different topic, but I always find it fascinating how many of these, structures in these systems that have been tried and true over time actually line up with our faith, with our sunnah of, when you have 3 people, you have to choose an emir according to the sunnah.
Right.
You have to choose a person who's ultimately in charge and ultimately makes the decision that the rest of, the team, will go with at the time. So an incident commander is one of the positions. Communications may also be one. Finance may be one, a person who takes care of all of the finances, understands, the money aspect going in, coming out. Governmental communication, maybe, or a government liaison, maybe, a position. And so we will typically use incident command system when we do respond, where we will divvy up responsibilities of X, Y, and Z person may be in charge of communicating with emergency management, state government, and federal government partners when we're responding. Another person may be in charge of ensuring that we have adequate funds on our credit cards to be able to spend. Another person may be in charge of logistics. They may be pre-ordering tools for us to pick up, supplies to pick up, ensuring that we have rental cars, hotels, for staff and volunteers to stay in. And so an incident command system is ensuring that everything gets done in a coordinated way, and not one person is, in charge of, that type
Everything.
of operation.
And these folks are typically IR staff, or it could be partners, it could be volunteers.
So we use incident command system at different levels. So the state is going to use incident command system. So the state will use the incident command system. And part of so incident command is a part of NIMS. That's a part of National Incident Management System.
Okay.
And so it's used at all levels.
Gotcha.
So an incident commander at the state level is communicating with the administrator of FEMA and communicating with, with high levels of leadership. And essentially, typically when the president will visit, when the president of the United States will visit a disaster site, they're typically meeting with the governor, they're meeting with the incident commander, they're meeting with the command team that is working on that incident. And so the incident command system will be used at various levels. The state will use incident command system. Part of that state level incident command system is nonprofits and what we offer. And then within the nonprofit space, there will be, we internally have an incident command system where we have a person who specializes on comms and communicating to our, public affairs team, communicates to our marketing team, communicates to our leadership team, communicates, and so it's used at different levels.
That's really interesting. So you started talking about this, but I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. What is the role of the federal government in all of this?
So the federal government, according to NIMS, is a support role. So the federal government will essentially come in when the county has maxed out what they're able to do, and then the state has maxed out what they're able to do. Typically, the federal government at that point will come in as a support role. So their role is primarily support. They will come in, they'll support the state. They will support, there are programs currently at FEMA that focus on individual assistance. And so they will work directly with homeowners and have programs for homeowners to essentially reimburse them for damages that, were caused by the disaster.
We know in a lot of other federally mandated programs, we have turned to the state and to the local governments to say, okay, this program is no longer being supported at the federal level like it used to. There is going to be more pressure on the states. And that's true for programs that we've talked about on the show before, like SNAP. SNAP was a federally funded program. It's gotten huge cuts. Now we're going to be turning to the state and local governments. That may or may not change your roles on what you are able to do. What do state and local governments do? What is their role, and how do we support them as a nonprofit organization?
That's a good question. So what we do, so a lot of the pressure has been turned onto the state. But the state typically, even prior to this year, the state will handle all of the mass care. So the evacuating, sheltering, all the emergency management aspects of, that disaster. The state will ensure that there's adequate food, shelters, space for people to go when there's a disaster. And so that role has not changed. So disasters still typically, again, start at the local level. And then when that support reaches its max and more is needed, that's typically when the federal government will come in the form of a presidential declaration that will open and allow funds to, be open for the state to utilize other types of services. The tricky thing here is that different states have different capacities, based on their budgets, based on what they're able to afford, based on their demographics, based on the economics of the state. So, not all states are equal, you can say at this point,
right.
Which does, make it, a little tricky because some states, some states are going to have, a harder time than others responding to disasters.
You've been in this work for a really long time. Have you seen an uptick in disasters? And is it continuing to hit the most vulnerable communities, or do you see it now expanding to everywhere in an unpredictable way? I am curious about this.
Yeah, very good question again. So we definitely see a trend in the United States if we look at the past 30 or 40 years where disasters typically will hit underprivileged communities. And many times it's the same communities over and over again. And so there is definitely a trend, in that way. We are seeing disasters become more severe and more unprecedented. I mean, it seems like we are in a way running out of ways to describe how severe a disaster was. And I mean, the most recent example of that is the unprecedented flooding that happened in the San Antonio, along the Guadalupe River. Is a tragic situation. that, to really try and comprehend that a river rose 26 feet in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And you had people celebrating the 4th of July, Independence Day. They're celebrating along the river, and the river rises in that way. Very tragic situation. We are seeing, we had Hurricane Helene, we had Hurricane Milton last year, and it seems like in some way disasters are, it's every disaster is breaking records. Every disaster is becoming more and more costly. We have the recent fires that happened in LA.
Yeah, and speaking of the LA fires, we actually have a video for our audience if to explain what happened in the LA fires and how did Islamic Relief respond. Please take a look.
I'm from here, from Los Angeles, and also I'm a volunteer in the Islamic Relief. I'm the chairman of the board.
And we're here in the Pasadena area at a resource hub that has been opened by Islamic Relief USA and our partners.
My house personally was, full of ashes because of the wind. And always in my mind, how we can get, the support from the supporter, from the donors, and send it to those who need it the most. And to me, those are other people. But seeing myself for the first time as part of my own community, waiting for the help and support from the government and other organizations, that it shows how important for everyone to work so hard in order to volunteer. I call it an honor, and I call it as an achievement for anyone who can get the reward of working for helping others, because you have no idea when you'll be the one, when I call you a victim or need that support. I'm really proud of the executive team from Islamic Relief. I want to say to everyone in Islamic Relief, thank you so much, and Jazakumullahu khairan, and may Allah bless you and your families for working so hard for the benefit of others.
Welcome back, everyone. As you saw from the video, the mass amounts of people that then needed help. Hani's with us again from the disaster management team. Explain to us, all these people, how do they get help? It's devastating as we sit here and watch these disasters happen and feel helpless. Explain to us the from beginning to end.
Yeah. So as we, kind of spoke about earlier, in the case of the fires, we had NIMS being activated. The National Incident Management System gets activated where first responders, such as firefighters, are coming in to put the fire out, to evacuate people. You had emergency management that was overseeing communication to the public, that was overseeing communication to news agencies, and also communication to state level leadership. And they are managing, multiple facets of this type of disaster. So we, as a voluntary agency, will come in when evacuations are lifted, when the safety has been restored by the first responders. We will typically come in, and the one exception to organizations responding prior to the safety being established is evacuation shelters. We'll set up evacuation shelters and feed people and house people that need that. And then when the disaster has been secured and people are allowed to, go back home into, spaces that have been partially damaged. In the case of the fires, people were not, they still had these no-go zones where, there was hazardous materials. If you think a fire is not only burning the home, but it may have burned, an electric car that has, a 2,000-pound battery that, got burned by the fire, and it could be hazardous to anybody who walks near it. And so when these areas were opened back up, this immediately our team was on the ground. We were actually there for the fires. We were essentially supplying first responders with essential items. So we had partnered with 5 of the major mosques in the greater LA area that were drop-off points for essential supplies. And we went out there with one of our partners called SKUX. They are a financial tech company that was, provided a way for us to give people financial assistance.
So fantastic.
And so what we did is with California State VOAD, we were able to work, and VOAD is Voluntary Agencies Active in Disaster.
Okay.
We have them at the national level, which National VOAD we're a part of. We're also a part of the state VOAD in each state. And we responded with many of our partners. Tsuchi Buddhist Foundation, we responded with Catholic Charities, we responded with Salvation Army, we responded with UMCOR, the United Methodists, we responded with the American Red Cross, we responded with Hope Foundation, we responded with many other groups, and we were actually set up at a Kaiser building. So part of emergency management and Office of Emergency Services in California, Kaiser had graciously donated this building for us to use. And you saw from the video how people would line up. So on our first day there, we had no idea what we would encounter in terms of numbers of people, but on the first day there was some 2,500 people that lined up to get support. And people needed support for various reasons. We had, essentially as part of our VOAD, we have a coordinated system that we go through a casework process where we, verify a person's identity. We verify that they are a person who was in fact affected by this disaster. And then we're able to, once they have been verified, they get a wristband that has a case number and a color on it. The color correlates with is this person destroyed, meaning they're essentially their home is a pile of ashes, or major damage, meaning the home sustained damage but is still a standing structure, or minor damage where the home received damage but is still inhabitable, they can still live in it, or affected. And affected may have been, affected not directly by the fire, but they may have been affected financially by being evacuated, and the electricity being cut off and having some sort of hardship. And so the first phase was to work with the demographic of people that needed help and needed support, and it may have been a small amount that will help them get back to a new normal. Many of the people that we helped, were in that, demographic. We did work with many people who were completely destroyed. And we actually have a picture in one of our reports where a client, insisted on showing us, his phone of him leaving and his home was, in flames, and he kind of, held his phone up and showed it to us, and his home was in flames. And then when he was allowed to go back, it just a pile of ashes. There was nothing standing there. And then we worked with clients that were evacuated, and due to the evacuation and electricity being cut out, they lost, everything in their fridge.
Right.
Which, for many communities in the United States, that is a devastating situation to be in. And it doesn't take away that others lost their home completely. For some people, if they had spent, the majority of their funds to, purchase food, now that food is bad, they are they're in a situation where they need help. And I'll never forget, there was, this in the California fires, there was an older lady, and SKUX allowed us to send funds directly to a person's phone, so they can leave this resource hub and they can go to a grocery store, they can go to a department store, they can go back to a hotel and essentially use tap to pay on their phone.
Oh, fantastic.
And so what we wanted to offer is the ability to have funds immediately when people walk out. We have seen many studies that showed that when people have quicker access to funds, they're able to recover quicker.
Right.
They're able to get back to a new normal quicker. which essentially is at the core of why we are there. And so, after explaining the tap to pay and that, that she has funds on her phone, she kind of looked at me and she was like, honey, so you're saying I can just go to the grocery store right now and purchase groceries and then I just tap to pay?
Yeah.
And then I was like, that's exactly what it is. And she said it, she was, teary-eyed, and you can tell she was moved, to know that, there were people there that gave her funds to go and buy the food that is familiar to her instead of being given a box of food.
I'm curious, and I don't want to interrupt your story, but when you are assisting people who may not be Muslim and you're coming in with the Islamic Relief logo, you're clearly Muslim, are there any reactions to your presence there as a Muslim?
Most of the time, it's very good.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most joyous parts of my job. As Muslim men, we don't wear a hijab. We're not always, when I'm not at work, I'm wearing a regular polo. I'm typically not recognized as Muslim. When I am at work, and we are deployed like that, it's typically like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Like, it's like there's a lot of positive feelings associated with it. One of the most common questions that we get is, but I'm not Muslim.
No.
Like, do you guys still work, with me, and it's like, we work with, we're here to help anyone who needs the help, who needs the support. Part of that question, I think, is about, that, we may pray differently, or we are, we're different people. But we're also an organization that doesn't proselytize. We don't force anyone to, talk to us about their belief. We don't ask them about their belief. And we don't really talk about our belief. As an organization, we are, our faith in the response is being there with a smile, with a dignified way of supporting communities. That's the core of what, our belief is. And, most of the time it is a positive reaction. There's, very, very, very few instances, we may receive, a negative, comment or, gesture or something like that. But for the vast majority of time, it's very positive.
Yeah, I always make this comment that, as Islamic Relief, our criteria is if you're a human. If you're a human being, we're going to help you. That's it. That is the criteria. Yeah. And so I'm glad that when we show up into these spaces that we are received and we're received well. And, we talked about this in another episode. When you're hungry, you don't care who's giving you the food as long as you're being helped in some way. And I'm sure that's even more so when you're experiencing a disaster and you've been displaced and you're starting over with your life. So definitely. Hani, I want us to pivot a little bit in terms of how supporters can be engaged with us. So you talked a little bit in the beginning about joining this work as a volunteer. Can you tell us about that process? Can anyone off the street, if they're an Islamic Relief supporter, can they become a volunteer, and how quickly would they be able to be part of the disaster response team? And, how does this all work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do, anyone 18 years or older is able to work with us. And so if you go to irusa.org/volunteer, sign up to be a volunteer, and indicate that you are interested in disaster management team. You'll be notified on any disaster management team opportunities that come up. So we actually have we have a webinar coming up soon that will, share a lot of this information. And we do, regular meetups, typically online, with our volunteers on supporting them to be ready whenever we do, make the call for volunteers. So once you sign up, you'll hear about trainings that we have in local areas. So we have some coming up here at headquarters, August 23rd. We have some coming up in Dallas, to be a part of our Muck and Gup team. and respond to disasters and mainly flooding incidents for that training. And once you take the training, you'll be, certified and ready to respond. And then through that same volunteer system, you'll receive a notification from us whenever we need, volunteers, which is typically any time that we go out into the field. We are, part of us being a nonprofit is that we are, our part of our goal is to increase that volunteer capacity and utilize volunteers during these responses.
Fantastic. And how timely, right? We're doing this episode and it's right before the webinars. So for our audience, just to reiterate, if you want to learn about the webinar and any upcoming trainings and any upcoming opportunities, you have to become a volunteer first. We will link that at the bottom of the screen to make sure that you go to the correct website. So I'm from public affairs. I'm always thinking about the government and how we can, be engaged with the government. Do you have any sort of suggestion on what we can do in terms of advocacy? And, if we're trying to push the government for something, are there certain things that you're like, I wish they would change this kind of policy, because that would make our lives a lot easier. And we always say in the humanitarian work, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, right? We don't want to be responding to disasters or having to feed people or having to advocate for people's rights, because hopefully it's a world where everybody has justice. We don't live in that world yet. And part of our faith is that we're always striving for that. So in the meantime, what are some things that advocates can do?
So very good question. And, I always like to keep in the back of my mind that we don't want to be obsessed with the problem. We want to find the solution to the problem. We don't want to be in love with being a part of a problem. And so the main thing to advocate for, I would say, is preparedness. That when communities are prepared, when communities are aware, the need for a greater response is much smaller, because communities themselves are, they're able to have a plan on what they would do ahead of time. And that's a lot of the preparedness work from the voluntary agency side is, training the public on what to do. And even the governmental side, preparedness is so critical and important because government may not only be preparing waterways to be able to carry more water when, a major rain event comes, but also, training these local communities, training emergency management to be more aware of what communities they have present in their communities. And so preparedness is the best way to actually save money ultimately. Save donor money, save federal money, save tax money, save state money. There's a rule that every dollar spent in preparedness will cost $7 during response.
Wow.
And that's an old statistic. I'm sure those numbers have, changed drastically as well.
I feel like I've just learned so much from you today, Hadi. I really, really appreciate you being with us today, talking about this. We know that we are approaching hurricane season. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it so that there are no disasters, and that we are focusing on preparedness, and that we are making sure that communities are able to thrive where they are. But if that's not the case, and if there are disasters that are in our forecast, then may Allah make it easy for you to be able to respond with your team and with all of the other volunteer organizations and with all the helpers. And I always tell our viewers, in times of need, look for the helpers, and you will see that people will come together in the most amazing ways. And inshallah, we'll always be able to respond as Islamic Relief, as Muslim Americans in this country, to be there for people when they're most vulnerable. Do you have any closing thoughts before we bid our supporters farewell?
No, thank you. And I appreciate, whoever listens and signs up to be a volunteer. It's always very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hani. And thank you to our supporters. As always, to learn more about all of Islamic Relief's work, visit IRUSA.org. And please stay tuned for new episodes of What a Relief every month. Subscribe and please share with your family and friends. Until then, Assalamu alaikum.